Hillary Clinton was nice enough to let West Virginia coal miners know she's going to knock them out of a job. And now the Democratic frontrunner in Iowa, Bernie Sanders, who's leading in the polls at present, at least one poll, says he's going to put Des Moines health insurance workers out of a job. But have no fear, they've got something even better.
Welcome to This Week in Common Sense, starring Paul Jacob. In this episode, Paul reviews the big stories for the second full week of 2020 as they appear on thisiscommonsense.com. Here's Paul.
And of course, what is being offered now is a new job and money. And in other words, it's nothing to just put coal miners out of work and just give them new jobs, find them new jobs in some new industry that the government creates. And in the meantime, just pay all their bills and all their health care. Let's not let anybody suffer. But we now have the ability, apparently, to just shelve whole industries. And no problem. Don't you worry your pretty little head about it. You're going to get a new job in, 2 years, a year, 3, 5. Bernie Sanders is talking about billions and billions, not billionaires, but billions and billions of dollars in this bill that he's proposing, Medicare for All, to pay for the dislocation of 500,000 insurance employees, health insurance employees. This is just unbelievable. And, the truth is, I reacted like, oh my goodness, this is, we've all known that that's what they're talking about, because that's, when Kamala Harris first said, yes, I would end private insurance, she got some backlash. But Bernie's said this all along. He's not, to his credit, the ideologue on the far left doesn't hide stuff very much. I mean, I think he's fairly straightforward in some ways. He's a more honest opponent. I disagree with almost all of his issues, but boy, when you agree with him, he might actually do what he says. He believes in things. He seems to. Now, unfortunately, a lot of what he believes in is socialism with a capital S and maybe with a C, replacing it as communism. This is a guy who honeymooned in the Soviet Union and has nothing but good things to say about Castro, about the Soviet Union, about folks like Morales in Bolivia, and others who Venezuela, he certainly doesn't condemn in the way that a lot of us have. And so this is someone who we've always kind of suspected is pretty soft for capital C communists. And one of our commentaries this week was Revolutionaries for Bernie. We have Bernie suggesting very huge changes in the economy, kind of like a command economy. I don't know. Communists have command economies, you might note, academically. And then this week we had an event that we discussed in a commentary called Revolutionaries for Bernie. And it came out that a fellow, Kyle Jurek, who is a field manager for the Sanders campaign in Iowa, was caught by Project Veritas. James O'Keefe, controversial, I think has done very, very good work, basically took down Acorn by showing, what office after office of Acorn around the country was all about from their hidden camera interviews. And he's hated on the left. And I think he has made some mistakes. I think his attempt to kind of sting the Washington Post would have caused a story that was untrue to be propagated on the public. And I think that was a real mistake. But I think generally, what he's doing is pretty heroic journalism, and I applaud him. And I've met him, I know him, I like him, and I think he's trying to do the right thing. So all the kind of hate that's sent his way by people I don't feel that at all. I feel the reverse. But he and Project Veritas really fill a role that you don't have a lot of media investigating the left in the way that it investigates the right, because the media is on the left. And we can kind of pretend that's it's not every media outlet all the time is saluting the Democratic Party, but overwhelmingly the media is on the left and just doesn't ask the same questions, doesn't investigate the left in the way that they do the right. And so I think Project Veritas serves a great service to the public. And here they have a field manager for Sanders talking about gulags and talking about how fascists, meaning anyone who might support Donald Trump, and you get the sense it might someday mean anyone who doesn't support Bernie Sanders or whoever Kyle Jurek thinks is the Fuhrer or the commandant or the great imperial leader or whatever. Just outrageous things being talked about in the most horrifying totalitarian, Russian communism, millions being re-educated like the Chinese are trying to do with the Uyghurs and so on. Just unbelievable that someone could talk that way to someone that, pretty obviously they don't know very well because the person was secretly filming them. So it's not like, a childhood friend. Anyway, just unbelievable. And yet, very little news coverage of it. When we went to press and in looking for stories, I've seen nothing more. But when we posted that story, there had been nothing, and to this date, there has been nothing done to get rid of Kyle Jurek, to say you're fired. We don't allow people who want a Pol Pot style communist takeover of America to run our campaign. And yet basically it was sloughed off as some sort of propaganda or gossip by a campaign manager in Iowa, the Sanders state director, and nothing from Sanders. And in my searches of the Washington Post, New York Times, no story on it. And so the story here to me originally was, wow, this person talks in such a way that it's just terrifying to think that people think this way. And it's important that we know that sometimes they do. And that surely they will take care of business and say, you're fired. And this is not what our campaign's about. And instead, because it isn't a story that was invented in the, I don't mean invented in a bad way. It wasn't, the idea of the story didn't come from the Washington Post or the New York Times or the AP or one of the networks that's on the left. It doesn't get covered. And in essence, Kyle Jurek, I believe, is still working. They have kind of locked up their Twitter accounts in Iowa, but is still working for the Sanders campaign. And the Sanders campaign has done nothing to come out and say, we repudiate this type of thinking, that when someone doesn't agree with us politically, they should be sent to a re-education camp. And just it's kind of a funny, yes, there are people who are this foolish. He also made the argument that the gulags weren't that bad. He seemed to have the idea that, boy, if you were sent to a gulag, it means you were out of step with the revolution. And that's a pretty doggone serious offense, which most of us just don't think that's as serious, terrible, but not that serious. And then also that the gulags, look, I don't know, maybe you got 3 meals, wasn't so bad. You'd learn new revolutionary songs to sing. I'm sure he could go travel to the millions of Uyghurs who are being, institutionalized and tortured in China and explain that, it could be worse. So just shows, I think, one, that there are a lot of people who just get carried away. And when you think of Kyle Jurek, you think of somebody who just has let politics and ideology and stuff get the best of them. And that happens, and that's sad. But a much sadder event is the fact that we live in a country in which the news media doesn't report this story, and that this, because the news media doesn't really care about this story, because it doesn't fit the narrative, I guess, that they want to run with. That I think that's what it is. I don't have smoking guns. I haven't tape recorded all the conversations. I think that's what it is. My newspaper has a narrative in every story, it seems, the Washington Post that I read, and much of the media seems to have a narrative. This doesn't fit it, and so it doesn't get covered. And that says that the problem is a lot bigger than one foolish guy who's gotten politically carried away. So the next day's commentary that I want to talk about is kind of funny and kind of not funny. And it's about primarily about the Libertarian Party as a whole, but also about one particular candidate who's running for president as a Libertarian.
And you're talking about Monday's piece, Vermin Competition?
That is right. And Vermin Supreme, who I met about a year ago, a little over a year ago, when I went to the Massachusetts Libertarian Party convention, and very interesting guy, funny, wears a boot on his head, which is, you just don't run into people that often that are wearing a boot on their head. But this is a very intelligent guy and a master performer, very quick on his feet and funny, and he's mocking, he's going to give free ponies to everybody. He really has a sensible, funny, penetrating, cogent statement to make about politics in America today. But he's making it in the wrong arena. And I did not go into this kind of detail and in fact, this wasn't even the thrust of my commentary. My commentary is much more about Lincoln Chafee, who let's talk about here in a second. But it occurred to me that in essence, Vermin Supreme, because he's the only candidate wearing a boot on his head, and because he's funnier than the other candidates, and maybe a little sharper in that way, that he's a performer in ways that they are not performers. So much of it is about him. And it becomes a mockery, which of course that's what he's doing, is satire. But it becomes a mockery not of politics as much as a mockery of the Libertarian Party, and of a mockery of politics across the board, in such a way that here this party that wants to talk about freedom and how our liberties, our rights, are the essential thing that government should be instituted to protect, and we need to be focused on that, and putting forward policy positions and changes in the law that will make us freer and hold government more accountable. Policy prescriptions that should be very serious. You don't have to be, you don't have to wear black every day and never smile. I'm talking about, but serious and thoughtful and important, and stuff that you want someone to listen to for a second because, hey, maybe here's a better way to build a mousetrap. Vermin Supreme kind of dumps all over that. And I don't think he's his goal. I don't think he's like some secret CIA, agent who was sent to dump all over that. I think his intentions are honorable. That he's trying to have fun. He's trying to make a point. He's doing it in a way that is kind of fun. And boy, anytime politics can be fun, it's better than not having fun. So, but it does end up mocking, I think, the Libertarian Party. He needs to run as an independent, and maybe come to the Libertarian Party things if you think you can get press there. If you want my PR opinion for maybe a small fee, I'd probably suggest that that's probably not the place you're going to get the most press. But why not go to the Republican and the Democrat, enter some of these other things, make this point. But I think the way he makes it within the Libertarian Party is mocking the Libertarian Party. And I think that if it's not the way that libertarians view it, I think it is primarily the way people outside the Libertarian Party view it. The people I know who've never been involved in that, who aren't libertarians, but who are sympathetic, who know I am and might make a comment to me about it, they see him as mocking the Libertarian Party. So that, I think, is I wish him luck in his endeavors outside of the Libertarian Party, I think. But the interesting thing is he got more votes. That was the point of the commentary than the most accomplished candidate running for the presidential nomination of the Libertarian Party, Lincoln Chafee. And we made the point that it's kind of interesting. Here is a Democrat who's running as a libertarian now. And of course, last time libertarians ran for president, the ticket that had the most executive experience in office running for president in 2016 was not Hillary Clinton and Tim Kaine, was not Pence and Trump. It was the libertarian ticket of Gary Johnson, the former two-term governor of New Mexico, and Bill Weld, the former two-term governor of Massachusetts. And of course, before that, Bill Barr ran as a libertarian. Is it Bill Barr? Bob Barr?
Bob Barr.
Bob Barr, isn't it? Not Bill.
Right, it's Bob.
Yes, Bob. Sorry. I just want to say that to anyone who is offended, I'm really sorry. If I offended you, I am really sorry. Actually, I'm sorry even if I didn't offend you, because I made a mistake, and that is the third one this decade. It's really starting to. Anyway, but we've libertarians, and I say we. I consider myself a libertarian. I tended to vote more Republican than Democrat when there's not libertarians, but consider myself a libertarian. And we have attracted more from conservatives. I think that's largely because economics tends to trump, no pun intended, and so we tend to draw more from the right and free market conservatives than from the left. But that's, it's certainly not an 80-20 thing. But it was interesting to see someone coming from the left. And of course, our friend Tom Knapp, and I don't always agree with his comments, but he had two very good comments giving information that I lacked in writing the commentary. You're never supposed to say that I know everything, but what I had read, which I thought was interesting and led me to want to do this commentary, had not mentioned that ballots had gone out before Chafee got in the race. So if you voted for Chafee, you had to write in. Of course, Vermin Supreme beat Chafee 26, I believe, to 4. So it wasn't very close either. The other thing is that this isn't the end all and be all. This isn't the Libertarian Party of New Hampshire picking their delegates or voting their preference. This is kind of it's a preference poll. It's a poll, a straw poll, that sort of thing. It has no real meaning. But of course, when you think about it, most of the primaries that Republicans and Democrats hold are preference primaries. They aren't actually deciding legally who is going to vote for whom. They are the delegates who are picked are free to vote any way they want. And of course, the convention can change that. And this last time, in 2016, the convention did adopt a rule that those delegates needed to vote for Trump on the first round. But a lot of times the media is talking about these as if they're picking delegates, and these delegates are bound to those people when they are not bound to those people. And it's a huge disservice to the public. It's frustrating. But it's like they report about the War Powers Resolution that the House passed as if it's going to have some impact. They report about all kinds of things that I think oftentimes they don't bother to tell people this doesn't have any real world impact, which I think part of the job of the media is not just to report the news, but to let us know, when something has legs and when it doesn't have any legs.
Vermin Supreme is a kind of an amusing creature. And do you know what his actual opinions are? I mean, he seems to be a satirist from a quasi-libertarian perspective. You know anything more than that?
I really don't. And I talked to him some at this event that I went to, and he wasn't 100% always in character, but almost 100% always in character. So you didn't really get that. And he's making fun of things, but he's not putting forward a serious platform, because of course that's not his shtick. And if he was putting forward a serious platform, it would kind of mess up his jokes, and his jokes would mess up his platform. So, I understand what he's doing, and applaud him for being a pretty decent actor and a pretty decent performer. But I also want to get back, though, just briefly to mention that Lincoln Chafee, I think, will have a tough time. He will have to fight for this nomination. And sometimes you think, well, this is a big fish and he's in a little pond. But little ponds, you gotta pay attention to those fish. They're used to having somebody who will pay attention and listen to what they want. And libertarians are not, their goal isn't to win the next election no matter what. Their goal is to send a message about what they believe in, about liberty. And so they're going to want to make sure he's solid enough on issues and can speak in a way that will send the right libertarian message. And I have to say, I have looked at it. In fact, it was you who, when he first announced it, had mentioned to me that, he was emphasizing a lot of the anti-war sentiments and end these endless wars. And lo and behold, going to his website and looking at some different things, you weren't fibbing. And he is really emphasizing civil liberties, stop spending us into the poorhouse, and end the endless wars. And I think he has a decent message. It'll be interesting to see kind of how he also talks about telling the truth. And I think when someone like Lincoln Chafee, who's been mayor, governor, senator, been a Republican, one of the things Tom Knapp, of course, pointed out is, yes, he's a Democrat becoming a libertarian, but before that, he was a Republican who became an independent, who then became a Democrat, who's now becoming a libertarian. So, but when you've done that, it seems to me he's going to have to say, look, obviously I haven't my entire life been a down the road libertarian on every issue, and how he speaks to that and so on, I think makes a big difference. For instance, I think a lot of times when libertarians are running for something like president, they're asked, all these hypothetical questions and do you, will we get to a libertarian society and so on. Nobody asked Reagan, are we going to get to that shining city on a hill? Because everybody knows, no, you're not. I hate to break it to you. And I don't even know how shining that city is. It seems like there's a lot of glare. You got to wear sunglasses. I much prefer a libertarian society, not shining so much, and it doesn't even have to be on a hill. I don't think I'm getting there either. We're in the society we're in. And I think one thing that libertarians can do is send a message that we believe in the process. And, we believe in more than just the process. We believe in freedom. But I think sometimes we're painted as these radicals who, will just do whatever. And that's not how the system works. And one of the problems we have is that we have two parties who, I was going to say they game the system, but that sounds so much nicer than what they're doing.
Well, they rig it.
They rig it, and they cheat, and they will destroy the system if it helps them. And they will, like Congress, hand away all their power against the very design of the framers, that the Congress would be the branch that represents the people most directly and is the first and most powerful branch of government. They've handed away all that power to be able to say, hey, it wasn't our fault, it's the bureaucracy, it's the courts, it's somebody else's fault. Re-elect me. The pension's great, the pay's great. I get all kinds of knowledge that makes me one of the, so much better a stock picker than I used to be. It's a great job. And so that's something that the way libertarians are not going to succeed merely by saying, look, freedom's wonderful. People agree that freedom's wonderful, but they want to know, what are you going to do right now in the real world? How's it going to affect me? Are my kids going to have a school to go to? Are there going to be taxes? Are there not? We can say taxation is theft and then explain philosophically why that is so, or argue that's not so. Nobody cares. Nobody's at home thinking about this next election saying, but my real question is taxation theft. That is an academic question. They're interested in real stuff. And so I think someone who can articulate, look, we want a society that is freer. We believe the answer to almost every problem, certainly most of the problems, is to free up the energies of the American people to solve these problems and get government out of the way. That's what we believe. But we are committed to a process that obviously it's democratic, there's checks and balances. If the public isn't willing to go certain places, we don't go there. At the same time, we could be very dynamic in terms of saying the war on marijuana is over. And maybe a libertarian president would say the war on drugs is over, because a libertarian president could pardon every single federal offender in that war. That war's over. Now, it could still exist at the state level, but we all know that the truth is the states are pushing back at the feds, saying states all over. I don't know what the number is even now, but I think it's 8 or something, are recreational marijuana is legalized, and many more than that medical marijuana, in a way that virtually anyone who wants to smoke marijuana can do so. You don't have to be dying of cancer to get marijuana in those medical marijuana states. So there's tremendous things that libertarians can do, but I think that they have to be very forthright in where they are going to draw the line and say, I'm going to use my presidential power to do this and this and this. And that means that even with the Congress controlled by two parties that don't like you, there's a tremendous amount the president could do on foreign policy, on criminal justice issues, so on and so on. But I think you also have to comfort people with the idea that, look, you may disagree with me, but I don't believe in a government by presidential fiat. I'm not going to do things that are against the laws of the United States, even if I believe those laws are not just. I'm only going to use the legal power I have. And I think that would be very comforting to the public, not just because you're going to have some people saying, oh, those libertarians are going to do all this crazy stuff, because we've been more forthright about how far we'd like to go ultimately. But I think that it also is comforting because I think there are an awful lot of Democrats and Republicans who are troubled by the level of lawlessness in the government. Absolute lawlessness. And I mean Democrats who are upset about the level of democratic lawlessness, the level of lawlessness in the Obama administration. And I mean Republicans who are upset about the level of lawlessness in the Trump administration. So I think there is an audience out there that, well, for instance, Justin Amash, who, and I don't say I've studied every issue, but he's so refreshing in that he explains his votes. I agree with him on almost every issue. I don't really agree with him on impeachment. I mean, I don't argue that someone can say, look, what Trump has done, I think is impeachable. I'm going to vote to impeach him. Okay, that's what you think. I wouldn't vote that way. I wouldn't push that way just because I think it's so destructive at a time in which the country doesn't need that. I just don't think we gain from it. We could debate the fine points of what Trump's done, but ultimately, to me, I wouldn't be pushing it. I don't think I'd vote for it because I don't think they rise. I don't think what Trump's done rises to that. But I do think that you have a government, you've got a deep state that, I mean, as I point out to people, you don't have to like Trump to be scared of the deep state. And you don't have to like the deep state to be scared of Trump. And I have a good friend, I told him during the campaign that Trump kind of scares me. And so anytime he would call me, he'd say, "You still scared?" And I have to say, I'm less scared. I'm less scared than I was. I think Trump's been a better president than I thought he would be. Admittedly, low bar. But I think the biggest factor in my fear factor about Trump is that the media, and I'm talking about, basically everybody but Fox News and talk radio, which doesn't do a lot of investigating they aren't the investigative journalists. They're the let's talk about it journalists. But the investigating media, the daily press media, is so over the top against against Trump that I just sleep a little easier at night. Mr. Trump is going to have a heck of a time getting away with anything because he's got a lot of people watching him. And it's easy to kind of say, well, geez, after Obama, I mean, the media, there's the Saturday Night Live skit where the media was asking Obama if the pillow they got him was soft enough, and just we're so not deferential to Obama. They were cheerleaders for Obama. And then with Trump, it's a little bit of what is it? You need a neck brace, a little bit of hit and run there, and
it sounds like you've gone into Friday's column already. Much Ado in
yes.
DC. You're actually well into Fridays, it sounds like. So we're talking about Much Ado in DC from January the 17th.
Yeah, that's very true. Which I think the interesting thing about where we are now is we mentioned in Fridays that there is no requirement. This is the second time Bill Clinton was being impeached during his 1999 State of the Union. And of course, now we're going to have Trump, same thing. And of course, Trump doesn't have to go to Congress. Thomas Jefferson used to, write him out and send him by mail, I guess, or maybe by courier. And so Trump could do it in a very Trumpian way, which is by tweet after tweet after tweet, and why not even keep in some of the misspellings just to give it that authenticity. And anyway, it does seem to me that so many people talk about Trump tweeting, and even Republicans who are supporters and defenders of the president say, now I wish he didn't tweet so much. But I have to say, how insane an idea to think that Trump would stop tweeting. It is a power beyond anything any president has ever had. And I don't in my head have when exactly Twitter took off, how much Obama was able to use Twitter. And my sense is that Twitter wasn't quite as hot a commodity then. My other sense is that Obama wasn't looking to use that. In essence, didn't really need to use it. I mean, if the regular media is going to cheerlead for you, you don't really have to go around the media. But think about a president without Twitter, whose every utterance of that president is either mailed to you or they have to buy television time or radio time to broadcast it to you, or it goes through the filter of the mainstream media. Think about a President Trump whose every utterance is either paid for communication to you, which would get expensive if you got to do that all the time, or it's through the filter of the mainstream media. he would be in big trouble. And the ability to use Twitter to go directly to the American people is incredible. And I don't say that, you know, a lot of people out there might say, well, you know, I'm not on his Twitter, you know, I'm not following the president on Twitter. And of course, I actually have hit the button to follow him, but I almost never go on Twitter. So when he tweets something, I'm not hearing it because he tweeted it, or at least I'm not hearing it on Twitter. I'm hearing it in the mainstream media, because now the media, it's easy. It's 140 characters. You can't really say, oh, we just were going to tell you about it. We couldn't actually show it to you. So they're showing you exactly what Trump wanted to say and said without any misquoting. And there it is. That's a tremendous power. And I can't imagine a president not making as much use of it as Trump. And even if the media isn't, maybe if they love you as much as they liked Obama, maybe you don't have to. But any future president is going to want to be using Twitter in a very strategic way. And Trump, I don't know how disciplined he is in terms of having some strategic vision and following that, or not just doing it off the, shooting from the hip every time. He certainly has had his share of misspellings. And he's said some things that I think are stupid and shouldn't have said. But boy, has Twitter been tremendous for him.
He's also, through Twitter, changed the conversation of the mainstream media in a way that he couldn't have done if he didn't have Twitter. I mean, he has basically changed the whole conversation of the country overnight because he said something that they thought was so crazy or something.
Yes. Yeah, it's there's some interesting things that I think are worth keeping in mind. I was very much appalled by the idea of a Muslim ban, the idea that you would ban a certain religion from coming into the country. And Trump said that. It was reported widely. As I recall, I think it was a couple weeks maybe later that he backed off of that and said, no, I'm talking about Muslim majority countries and specific ones and so on, which is a different issue in my mind. I think a president could make the argument for that, while a president could never make the argument for banning all Muslims, that would just be afoul of the Constitution and every fiber of our being, our democratic being. See, I can be on the pro-democracy side. Anyway, but here's the thing about Trump. That Muslim ban, which I found so offensive, and the media found offensive, they found it so offensive that when he backed off of it, they never really let him back off of it. They always kind of talked about the Muslim ban as if it was the same thing he originally announced. I saw an article that talked about polling that showed a majority of the country, not a majority of Republicans, a majority of the country, when he said that, agreed with that statement. Now, I find that scary about my country, but also find that interesting in that I wonder if Trump was aware of that. It's one thing to say something that seems out there and then strategically, politically, to move to a position that's more defensible. But why do that? Why take the beating on an issue like that if you're going to move? Now, I would say, don't take that position because it's the wrong position. But if you're just thinking pragmatically, what's good for me? Well, it is probably wise to take a position that tells people you're serious about protecting them, or whatever the positive thing is about what you're trying to do. It makes you look much more serious. You get beat up on it, which means now the focus is even more on it. And there you are, the majority of the people, every time they hear the story. It reminds me in 1994, I think the media thought that the contract with America was a gimmick and that it didn't make Republicans look very good. to have these, 10 items and so on. But of course, every time they mention those 10 items, they mention term limits. And they mention a balanced budget and living under the laws and so on. And I think, in a sense, the media would report more about the contract than they might have, because they thought this will hurt these Republicans. And the media is largely, at least the folks writing the stories in Washington, D.C., are almost all on the Democratic side, if not further to the left than the Democrats. And so, it's one of those things where it feeds on itself. And I see Trump, I think, do that a lot, where he picks a fight in a very smart place. I'm not talking about smart in the great, what a wonderful thing to do, but politically smart in that his opponent is fighting a battle that they're not winning, if the goal is to get more people to vote for you and support what you're doing. And so he's no dummy. And I have an awful lot of media friends who, when I say that I think he's a communications genius, their heads explode. But he's a communications genius.
That's almost a variation of the Mott and Bailey tactic. Are you familiar with that metaphor?
I'm not.
The Mott was the heavily fortified structure in a medieval town, and the Bailey was the less fortified place where the people lived. And the idea of a Mott-Bailey tactic is that people come out with an extravagant statement, and they say, there's something that really isn't defensible. People attack it, and then they retreat to their Mott statement, which is something that almost everybody agrees with.
Right.
And they abandon the ideas in the medieval cities that you bring everybody in when you're under big attack to the Mott. And in rhetoric, if you've said, for instance, that all wages should be equalized, that we should have wage and price controls so that women and men have the same incomes, right? That would be one thing. It's people then say, well, that's just crazy. We can't have wage and price controls. We can't micromanage the economy. That would be stupid. And then they say, oh, I don't really mean that. What I really mean is that people just should be treated equally. Women and men should be treated equally. And so they go retreat to their Mott. Oddly, Trump is doing something similar. But by saying the extravagant thing, he gets other people to retreat to his Mott. It's a rather interesting.
Yes.
It's almost as if he's trying to get people to go into the Mott, the position that it is easier to defend.
Yes, well, and he also has been able to control the news cycle for almost every day after day after day after day, and in part doing things. And it's like with the Soleimani killing. People saying, well, he may have done that just to take something else off the front page and so on. And, the Bill Clinton was accused of doing that when he bombed, Monica Lewinsky was testifying, or there was something coming out and in that case, and all of a sudden he's bombed a pill factory in Sudan and somewhere in Afghanistan. And it's, he was accused of that same thing. And of course, it's very possible. I remember seeing soon after the Ukraine scandal was talked about, and Trump's doing this to help his own reelection, and then of course the Chinese trade deal. Well, there's tremendous pressure on any president. Trump gets a trade deal with China, and they buy a bunch of agricultural products. That's going to be a lot better for his reelection. Then he continues to have a fight and doesn't get the trade deal done, and farmers are in trouble, or he's having to kind of in Bernie Sanders fashion, he's having to find a pot of money to give to the people that, because of his tariffs, are losing all this money. Same sort of economic idea, that presidents, to help themselves and the economy and everybody else, of course, but mainly themselves politically, are going to be switching around money and jobs and deciding things like they're some kind of very ancient dictator. So it's, all of these, any of these type things, the president has incredible power. And there are very little controls. And of course, I think a lot of this lately, with Iran and so on, I've been very frustrated because there's a lot of talk about whether, he legally could do this. And it does seem like Congress has given him such legal leeway that he can do anything. And very little talk about where should those parameters be. And I think if you start to talk about where should those parameters be, we're going on a tangent, but it's a good one. If you start to talk about where those parameters be, you have to really start talking about our foreign policy in a more complete way, and not a one-off because almost any one-off, should we keep troops in Syria to stop Turkey from doing X, Y, and Z, which of course I think we could have pulled the troops out and still stop Turkey from doing it if we were really serious about doing that. But then we have to question, is that what we want to do? But almost any one-off, there's always we just need to express our strength and show people how strong we are and fight. Anytime we don't fight, we encourage more gamesmanship on the other side and so on. And the reality is that unless you look at it as a whole, you're always kind of, well, let's just keep on keeping on. And our policies, we're all over the world, and all we know is that we're not being told the truth. Afghanistan, and I don't think we've really done a commentary since the Washington Post and New York Times have released the stuff about all the lying, which is not just the Trump administration, but does continue to be the Trump administration, but Obama administration and Bush administration, where they've just constantly lied about what's going on in Afghanistan. And when there's bad news, we'll even go to the extent, and this seems to be happening more under President Trump, we'll go to the extent of classifying the bad news so it cannot be reported. And this is not a recipe for a great country to remain great, or a free country certainly to remain free. So that's a huge problem. But we should get to our last commentary of the week. And the one, as I mentioned to you before we started taping, has legs. It's called
Poked, Stoked, and Woke.
Yes.
That's from the Tuesday, it looks like.
Yes. And you didn't like the word woke because it's so overused on the left. But that's why I liked it. And I remember we went back and forth on that. But I did like it because I think that the left, meaning the Democrats in Virginia who've taken over the legislature and Governor Northam, have hit a hornet's nest and have woke a lot of regular people, not all conservatives, but conservatives and Second Amendment activists. They are looking to do all kinds of things on guns that will have no impact whatsoever on any of the mass shooting years ago in Virginia Tech, the mass shooting last year, 12 people killed by a city employee in Virginia Beach. And I note that Virginia Beach, the people of Virginia Beach, through their city council, have named themselves a Second Amendment sanctuary city. So, if your goal is to have solidarity with Virginia Beach, the people of Virginia Beach don't want happening what the legislature is trying to do. But it's gotten even weirder as the week has gone on, because Governor Northam has declared a state of emergency. And there's a huge rally planned for Monday, the 20th, Martin Luther King Day. And they know that there's going to be hundreds, maybe thousands of Second Amendment activists who have a right to conceal carry or who might want to open carry. And the governor announces that because of a state of emergency, he is canceling basically Second Amendment rights. Local court, state court, circuit judge upheld that and is allowing him to basically cancel. No one can have a gun on the Capitol grounds. And it's I think designed largely to just tweak the folks there. They've had rallies every year. Now this one's going to be bigger because the problem in the legislature is a whole lot bigger. But it's interesting. In my commentary, I pointed out something. In his State of the Commonwealth speech, Governor Northam basically said, let this be a debate, the gun debate. Let it be a debate about facts, not fear. And it just hit me because he had tried to push all kinds of gun changes through a special session, which he called right after that mass shooting in Virginia Beach. And in essence, tried to use fear and that moment in time to have not a thoughtful debate, but a debate where political pressure and emotions forced a certain decision. And Republicans had none of it. To their credit, they went to Richmond, they gavelled in, they said, we're not going to do the governor's agenda on violating Second Amendment rights. They adjourned and they went home. Now, and much has been made that, they lost their majority on the gun issue, which it was an issue, not the biggest issue, not the second biggest issue. I mean, healthcare, other issues were much bigger in the state. But it's interesting to me that I think after almost every election, like I thought Hillary Clinton was likely to win in 2016. And in thinking ahead, what do I want to be doing in 2017? I thought I can be more aggressive. There's going to be a huge backlash to the fact that now Hillary Clinton is in control. And Democrats would have been more likely to say, oh, okay, well, everything's fine. Boom. I'm not so worried about it. I'm going to be spending more time doing something else other than politics. Conservatives, limited government people, would have been much more attuned to what's going on, much more ready to make something happen in terms of changing to, politically. And so there were opportunities. Same is true. It's not surprising that Democrats had a wave in 2018. That's who's energized. And I think you almost always see that it'd be one thing, look, if the public's waiting for their side to get in power, and once they do, everything's going to be wonderful, well, then you wouldn't see this flip back and forth. I mean, look at the U.S. Congress, after not being Democrat for 40 years until 1994, has flipped several times since then. And it's largely because they aren't successful. Republicans, when they were in control, Republicans were bitterly complaining. When Democrats have been in full control, Democrats have bitterly complained. They're not successful. And so you're going to have that flip back and forth. And I think what Northam has done, in essence, is to give Republicans a huge opportunity to energize and to make, 2 years from now, a much better situation. So I hope that's what will happen. I do think you're going to see a lot of people there on Monday. And I think, again, this is the sort of, it'd be interesting if this was an argument between keeping people safe. These are all gun safety measures now. In the Washington Post, everything I've read in the last couple of days about these measures, they're not gun control, they're not gun restrictions, they're all about gun safety. Because who could be opposed to safety? And but I think it would be a different story if these were measures that would actually make some difference. They are symbolic measures. If you think that you're going to outlaw assault weapons, military style assault weapons, now weapons don't come with some little checkbox, military assault, not military assault. These are words. They're not how guns come. And so, but whatever gun you are trying to basically outlaw, it's still going to get here. It's not going to get here by honest people. The crooks can still get that gun. The honest people can't. After every one of these shootings, they suggest different things. And then the operative question, if that had been in place, would have made any difference in that shooting and that person getting a gun? And the answer is again and again, no. So what's the point? The point is to have a political fight about it. The point is for someone to win and someone to lose, and then whoever wins or loses gets control of that big piggy bank. Trillions, trillions every year. It's not about guns. It's about trillions of dollars. It's about using that issue to hold power or to retake power. And not that probably isn't the way Republican politicians. I go not every week, unfortunately, because I'm too busy. But my wonderful oldest daughter, who's provided two grandsons already. Good job. I go hopefully every week, sometimes every other week, and we watch Veep. I don't have HBO. She has it. The greatest show ever. It is the most accurate portrayal of Washington, D.C. politics I have ever seen. Spot on, because everyone is all about themselves and about nothing else. So I'm sure that when Republican politicians are thinking about guns and Democrats politicians are thinking about guns, they're thinking about themselves and politics and winning and having the power to handle the money. Monday, when I go to Richmond, I'm going to be with people, whether you like their politics or not, who believe in something and who believe in what I think is a essential element of American freedom. I'm convinced that in 1989, when Chinese students occupied Tiananmen Square, week after week after week, when the people of Beijing supported that demonstration, had they had anything even vaguely resembling the sort of private gun ownership we have in the United States of America, China would be a free and democratic country today. Millions of people would be out of prisons and concentration camps. Millions of babies that moms and dads wanted to have would be alive and with those moms and dads. It's just, it's just that, to me, I don't see any way around the fact that, you could see it in the streets in 1989. You could see the fact they sent troops in, and the people in the streets went and blocked the trucks coming with soldiers and talked to the soldiers. And they, in essence, they sent the troops in to pacify the demonstration, and the people of Beijing pacified the troops. I mean, the support is there, and yet they don't have the means. And I'm convinced that our freedom, the idea of the Second Amendment, isn't that anytime we decide the government is, gone over the edge a little bit, that we start shooting things up. That's not the idea. The idea is never to have to use those weapons. And it's not for government kind of going over the line a little bit, because government goes over that line all the time. If you wanted to look at serious violations of rights and say, oh, then we should start using our Second Amendment rights and let's take on the government, you're crazy, because they violate our rights all the time. That Second Amendment right is there for very horrendous government oppression. And it also, I think, helps us every day that laws are made anywhere in the country, because there's this tendency of crazy ideas sometimes to get put forward. And if those ideas check through a couple of checks, like, well, could we actually do that? Would that work? Wouldn't we find that people would be angry with us or resist? Some of those checks aren't there. Those ideas start to come up more and more, and then sometimes they get instituted. And we live in a country in which politicians have a whole bunch of ideas that they can't really bring up or try to implement, because they know there is too much resistance. And that resistance is not just someone writing a letter to the editor. It is a unified resistance among the population that could only be overcome by force. And in America, government can't win by force. That is huge. In America, government can't win by force. I don't think I've ever thought that before. I've never said it quite that way. I don't even know if I've thought it that way, but I think it's true. And the reason they can't is because we have more force. They've got nukes, they've got planes and stuff, but of course they don't have them unless we fly them. But in essence, the public is better armed. The American public is better armed than the government. And yet there's no fear. The government doesn't have any reason to fear, because unless the government is oppressing us, these guns are in the hands of little old ladies and little old men and shopkeepers and people who are traveling to go do their business and just don't know what neighborhood they might be in. And these are the guns that the guy grabs and runs to the church to defend the people because he hears the gunfire. There's a reality to that I think it's easy for people to dismiss. It's easy for people to say, oh, Paul, you're crazy. You're talking about people having gun battles all the time. We're beyond that. We're more sophisticated than that. And thankfully, in places like Poland and Czechoslovakia and other places, you've had people who were disarmed, who had the courage and the guts to come out into the streets and to do with their bodies what they're doing in Hong Kong. They're disarmed. And so they're having to have the guts to use their bodies as weapons because they don't have weapons. And because the government doesn't have to doesn't have to fear the force of the people of Hong Kong. They're disarmed. We don't ever want to be disarmed. And I say that as someone who personally, I can't own a gun. I refused to register for the draft on principle when I was, 20 years old. I was convicted. I'm a felon. Thank goodness I can vote here in Virginia, but I cannot own a gun. And I'd like to, because I'd like to be part of the defense of America. I don't mean just against foreign people, but if something went down in my neighborhood, I'd like to be able to help because I trust myself. I'm not a hothead. I do something good. I trust other people too. We made a little video years ago making this point that anytime I hear guns are flying off the shelves, during the Obama administration, you'd hear that at different times because they were afraid there'd be some gun control measure. It made me feel safer. It made me feel safer, not because I'm going to, power up with a bunch of weaponry. I can't. It made me feel safer because the more my neighbors are armed, the better. Not that every person who might get their hands on a gun is good, but the majority are. And you look at areas of the country where there's gun ownership are not the areas that have high crime. So it's this issue, it just seems to me that as soon as someone comes up with a gun control or gun safety measure that actually would prevent some of these mass shootings or other killings, then let's talk about it. Until then, you know what? You're really better off offering prayers and your heartfelt sympathy than a bunch of stupid politics after these various events.
Do you remember the Mao statement, power comes from the barrel of the gun?
Yes.
Which I must say always kind of chilled me because I don't think it's quite true. But there is an element of truth to it. And when the people in power want to take away the guns from the people, then the people in general aren't in power. I mean, there's a sense that power. I mean, we believe in America. We're allegedly believing in the people are sovereign. The people are the source of the government. So if the people don't have guns, they're not in power. It's the government that has the gun that's in power, according to Chairman Mao.
According to Mao. And,
Yeah. So,
and Mao's onto something there. He's not an idiot when it comes to political power. He certainly knew how to wield it and keep it for decades. But it's not, if power was from the barrel of a gun, then Czechoslovakia and Poland would still be communist. But it requires a degree of unity, because one or two people doing things are not going to overturn a dictatorship or an oppressive authoritarian government of whatever kind. And so it requires a tremendous amount of unity, and it requires people being willing to sacrifice themselves oftentimes. And it amazes me, but people are willing to do that because they understand that a life without any freedom is not a life. They care about themselves, but they also care about their kids and their grandkids and their wife and husband or whoever. And so somebody might think about it and say, well, but having a gun and rushing out and shooting people, that's not a way to live either. The point is, you don't have to rush out and shoot anybody. We have the guns. They're in the, there's, all this talk, like with this rally coming up, there's talk about the militias. There's going to be some militias there. Well, there's nothing wrong with a militia per se. If people want to train and march around and learn how to shoot guns, that's probably a good thing, not a bad thing. Now, I'm not into that, and there are some people into that who I'm really not into. But the reality is, we have no reason to fear these gun owners and these Second Amendment supporters. This is not where any crime's coming from. These are people who, and I happen to agree with them, but if you disagree with them, point out all the terrible acts they've committed. I think you're going to have a heck of a lot of trouble. And it just infuriates me that they have, in essence, by the governor talking about the state of emergency and talking about these three people who were arrested in another state who are white nationalists. There were three people arrested in Maryland. One of them's actually from Canada, who are supposedly white nationalists, like the Black Panthers, who were Second Amendment people. Little joke there. And now they've basically conflated these stories to make it seem that the real problem was that there were going to be so many white nationalists at this rally, and that it would be just like Charlottesville, as if these are the same people who came to the rally in Charlottesville. Now, I don't know, maybe there are some white nationalists, which in and of itself is not a crime, just makes you an idiot. But that's not a crime. But they were accused of gun crimes, that they had illegal weapons or whatever that they'd modified. All right. But it has a very tangential, supposedly these three people talked about going down to this rally. That's not a reason to declare a state of emergency. And the way the media has run it, if you're not paying close attention, there's just this story about a rally and they don't want guns there because of the white nationalists. And it strikes me as a lot of folks just enjoying the ability to try to merge Second Amendment supporters with white supremacists. Everyone secretly, black or white these days, is a white supremacist. It's just gotten to be ridiculous. But it probably ensures that I travel to Richmond on Monday.
oh, wow. When I think twice at least in that speech that, what was his name, Northam gave, he talked about Charlottesville. I mean, which is not in Virginia, right? That's
it is in Virginia.
Is it in Virginia? Okay, it is in Virginia. Okay. But I kept on thinking of Thomas Jefferson, who was for the Second Amendment, and James Madison, who was for the Second Amendment. The way he was talking was almost as if he was regarding them as Nazis. I can sort of see the pictures of Jefferson and Madison in Nazi uniforms, according to Northam, and it seemed weird. the whole thing seemed very strange and very manipulative. And
Yes, and here's a guy. This is a guy who is casting these dispersions on Second Amendment supporters, and I think he knows exactly what he's doing. Who is the same guy who was caught in the blackface and Ku Klux Klan guy on a picture in his personal page on his yearbook, his medical school yearbook. He admits that, well, at first he apologized for that. Then the next day he said, I don't know how that picture got there. And then there was an investigation, a law firm hired by the medical school, I think the Eastern Virginia Medical School or something, that hired this law firm. The governor was not that cooperative with the law firm, did get interviewed, but was not as cooperative as they would have liked from what I read, which tells you something. And they came with no conclusion. They didn't know how that got there. They don't know whether he knew about it or didn't know about it. But that's an awful lot of, giving him the benefit of the doubt. There's been no investigation by the media for the most part. And it seems to me that that's who should be investigating and asking some follow-up questions. But I think they don't want to. I think they like Northam. They like his politics. And if you like somebody's politics in the world of media today, you might not want to ask them any tough questions. So it really is obnoxious to have that person be the person who's standing there in a position of power, acting as if people who are supporting the Constitution are somehow, evil Nazis.
Well, that's it for this week's podcast. Please catch Paul Jacob 5 days a week at thisiscommonsense.com and on the weekends as video and audio also available at the same site. In case you are interested, you can reach me on Facebook, Twitter, Gab, and Minds under the moniker @Workman. That's Workman with an I, not an O, and at workman.com. You can reach Paul on Facebook as well as at libertyifund.org and citizensincharge.org. Thanks for your attention. Paul appreciates it.